I've got this Saturday morning routine where I get a stack of books and I wake up in bed, I get a strong coffee and I read through a huge selection of books that people send me. I read through blogs, I listen to podcasts, I read magazines. So I thought there used to be a time when we'd really look forward to the weekend newspapers, but now it's mostly garbage and media is mostly noise. It's very hard to find the quality stuff. So I thought, seeing as I curate it for myself anyway, I thought we'd do a weekly Saturday morning edition where I run through what I'm reading, recommend them to you and ask for your recommendations in the comments too. So let's get into it. Okay, so the first thing I want to recommend is the collected short stories of Guy de Maupassant. I didn't expect to like Maupassant so much because I'd read critics like Harold Bloom and Colin Wilson who said that he's not great and that you should really only read him as in a sort of introductory preparation for better writers like Chekhov, and that to appreciate Maupassant you have to experience him like oysters, like one after the other. Well, you know what? I disagree with the critics. I love Maupassant. I think he's thrilling. I love how rough around the edges he is. And what I've been doing is I've been going through all the stories and giving them a grade, A plus B, all that sort of thing, in the hopes to make a beginner's guide to Maupassant. But, if you can't wait for the beginner's guide, I'll just say get yourself the Roger Collet edition and treat yourself because the stories are a lot of fun. Obviously I mentioned Chekhov, so I picked up this gorgeous Everyman edition of the volume 1 of Chekhov's short stories. Now, I love Everyman. I think they're a great company. I think they do a lot of good in the world, and they also produce the most beautiful books. The secret is you have to take off the dust jacket. You've got a book that will make your library look amazing. Now, Anton Chekhov, and now you want to pick the right translation. Now, the translation I've got is by Constance Garnett, and I'll be honest, I'm not too much of a fan of Constance Garnett when it comes to the Russians. I much prefer Pivia and Volokonsky, the Russian translator couple team. But oh well, Chekhov's power still shines through even though I don't like the translation. In this particular volume, we've got a great short story called The Kiss, which I will actually make a dedicated video on at some point. But if you want a great short story writer, go for Chekhov. I got sent this book. This is How to Think Like Shakespeare by Scott Newstock. I've just started rifling through and it's really interesting, and it's all about how to cultivate a Renaissance mindset. And it's called Lessons from a Renaissance Education. I'm very curious to see because it's so beautifully produced. There's some gorgeous pictures. There's some wonderful references. It's interesting so far. I can't wait to see more. And to be honest, I'm going to reach out and ask to interview him because I'm so far enjoying it. We also have this fascinating biography on the Bard, Shakespeare by Peter Ackroyd. I've read his Blake. He's also got one on Dickens and other writers. What you realise when you start reading this, because I'm doing a Shakespeare journey where you read the Bard chronologically, what you realise is what we know about Shakespeare is so polluted and so biased by the academics, that it's actually not true. It's all image. I wanted to find out more about Shakespeare, the man, the human, and Ackroyd does a great job at demystifying one of the most mysterious writers in our history. This will open your eyes if you put the Bard on the pedestal before. This one will bring reality into focus. Fascinating and very, very well written. It's the sort of biography where you can just dip into whatever part you fancy. It's fascinating, a fascinating insight into Shakespeare. Now, for an even more fascinating insight into Shakespeare, what you might want to do is pick up the plays of Marlowe, Christopher Marlowe. He was Shakespeare's contemporary and Shakespeare learned a lot from Marlowe. Now, a critic called Bloom, he has this idea of influence where you can kind of see where writers basically, they would begin by stealing and begin by imitating the writers before them. They'd have their own literary heroes. And at a certain point in their literary oeuvre, you can see where they reject the person who taught them everything. So I thought, seeing as Shakespeare, the first few plays of Shakespeare are basically Marlowe, it would be very interesting to read Marlowe. Now, the funny thing about Marlowe is his personality and his temperament was completely opposite to that of Shakespeare's. He was a troublemaker. He used to fight and brawl and murder, and he died very, very young. Shakespeare and Marlowe would have met each other in the theatrical world in London, but I imagine Shakespeare would have stayed well clear of him and wouldn't have wanted to piss him off. Anyway, so I'm beginning with Faustus, and then I'll be moving on to Tamerlane, and also the Jew of Malta and Edward II, so that should be interesting. I mentioned Harold Bloom. I think that anybody who's reading Shakespeare, this huge, meaty volume is indispensable. It's Shakespeare, the Invention of the Human. He goes through all of the plays. Bloom is a bit controversial. He's not PC. He doesn't like feminism or overt liberalism, and that shines through his work. If you can put up with that, then I think he's very intelligent, although I do disagree with him on many things. I think that he would have relished the disagreement from someone like me though. So bedside table, we also have the two Henrys. As I'm going through this journey, I'm taking an idea from my friend Matt, who's reading the complete works of Shakespeare, and what he does is he's got the books that he's read on one side of the shelf and then the books upcoming, and he makes sure he's got a good pile of books and he can see what's coming next. He can look forward to them and he's never left waiting for books to arrive. I thought this was a really good technique, really motivating. I'm stealing it, I'm doing it myself. Another book, I picked this up in a London bookstore. It's Kidnapped by Robert Louis Stevenson, and it's really, really damn old. I love Stevenson. I'd say he's a tremendous writer. I know everything about his writing life, his writing style. I love Dr. Jekyll and Hyde. And I picked this up for about £3, although I'm trying to find out how much this is really worth, because I have a feeling it's worth a few hundred. It's published, maybe you can help me, it's published by Cassell's La Belle Sauvage, London, and I think it's a first edition. I'm not sure, I might be wrong on that. If it is, it's going to fetch quite a bit, or a few hundred at least. Might be wrong, but I love how books used to be. You used to get, like, firstly, you get the title, and then you basically got a subtitle that gives away the whole freaking story, and then you've got, like, a little excerpt. Like, modern day would be Netflix, where they show you, like, a really good bit from, I don't know, season 1, episode 3, where there's a fight. But it's showing you from page 50, where, you know, an illustration of the action to make you think, oh, I'm gonna get this. It's got, full page illustrations, it's got a pull-out map, and what's really interesting is right at the end, it has some exercises where it challenges the reader to talk about the plot and what went on in the book, which is interesting and makes me think that people used to read in a different way. People used to read more attentively, and people used to also use books like this to challenge their retention, challenge their memory, challenge their comprehension. It's something we don't do anymore. It's the first time I've seen that in a book. I think that's fascinating. Right, magazines. I actually don't like the New Yorker. I do not agree with how one-sided and vehement and violent their politics is. I don't agree with the fact that they can't keep politics out of their fiction. I think it makes it extremely boring. I think it makes it repetitive, and I think it robs stories of life and blood and colour, and I just think it's abhorrent as a publication. I decided I'll pick up this copy because it's got an unpublished story from Ernest Hemingway, and it's got a story from Haruki Murakami, one of my favourite writers. I found that the unpublished story, there was a reason it was unpublished. I would actually hazard to say that it's not good, and Papa wouldn't have wanted it published. It's just not. It's not one of Hemingway's best. It's not worth picking up the volume 4. And I'd also say that the story from Murakami is not as good as some of his other stuff. It's called Confessions of a Shinagawa Monkey. I don't know, maybe if you're a die-hard Haruki Murakami fan, you might pick it up, but not sure about that myself. If you want a good magazine, I would say pick up The Spectator, and I would say look for a columnist called Douglas Murray. He actually provides real nuance on the current situation, the current political situation. Statues come down, Douglas Murray has something to talk about it. Everything we've talked about this year, from coronavirus to race, he has got an opinion that you don't often hear, and it's controversial. Now, I found myself thinking, wow, how do you have the balls to write that? And I did some investigation about Douglas Murray, and apparently he's under protection. Apparently he has pissed off a lot of people, and he's actually not living the safe life. So I suppose he's doubling down. He's thinking, hey, if I'm in trouble for what I'm saying anyway, I might as well just say everything. So whether you agree with him or not, I reckon The Spectator is a fresh breath of air, you know. As for things from the wider web, there's a website that I came across recently called Bradbury Media, run by Phil Nichols, and it's basically all things Bradbury. And he's just now starting to develop a podcast, I think called Bradbury 100. He's planning on doing 10 episodes where he interviews different Bradbury experts, Bradbury lovers on all things Ray Bradbury. If you know anything about me, you'll know that this is right up my street. It's nice to check in and just kind of read about, I don't know, Something Wicked This Way Comes, or read about The Illustrated Man. If you like Ray Bradbury, I consider it an essential resource. Another WordPress website that I've come across recently is called Hoku, and whoever runs it, a man called David, basically he takes a poem every so often and he just analyses it, but analyses it in a really delightful way, in the sort of analysis that I appreciate. He doesn't go into sort of life lessons and extract things in that sense, but it's real tangible loving analysis, like analysis that's on the level of being artistic in and of itself. So he's a great critic, and he's a great resource for anyone who likes to not only read poems, but also think about how they work, the mechanics, and a little bit about the biography of the authors. So that's a good website as well. Again, sticking with the poetry theme, if you go on Twitter, now Twitter is a cesspool, it's toxic. I don't recommend anyone spend any significant time there, but if you have to, follow Sir Patrick Stewart, because he does a sonnet a day. He started during lockdown and he's just continued. I think he's at 70 plus sonnets now. Really delightful. I love it whenever he gives a little bit of commentary, a bit of intro and conclusion, but to be honest, he's just got a lovely voice. Each sonnet, perfect. And it's a real sort of rustic amateur in a really endearing sense, because he's obviously not amateur, he's a thespian, but amateur in the sense of he's just turned the camera on and he'll start reading a poem, he'll get a few lines in, he'll go, no, let's do it again. And he'll say, let's really get the meaning. And that's really nice to watch. It feels really authentic. It's one of the few things that you can come across as a literature lover on social media and really appreciate, so I'd recommend that. There's also a website called Tolstoy Therapy. One of the big books that I'm reading this year is Anna Karenina, and then I'm going to go on to War and Peace, and so I came across a website called Tolstoy Therapy, and it's not just about Tolstoy. There's an article, links below, links in the article attached. There's an article about bibliotherapy, and the author of the website, Lucy, is talking about different ways to use literature to ameliorate PTSD and anxiety and depression, and I think not enough has been said on this subject. So I would look to her, and I hope that she develops this, because what's there already is quite interesting. And if you're like me, doing the Shakespeare thing, doing the chronological journey, or just trying to read the entire works of the Bard in a year, there's a website called Shakespeare and Beyond, and that's well worth checking out. I think it's lots of different writers, and it's just a deep dive into really nitty-gritty, niche, Shakespeare-esque stuff. You'd only like it if you're really getting into Shakespeare. It's not casual reading, but if you're following a Shakespeare journey, you want to learn more, it's a great resource to have, well worth bookmarking. And that's about it. That's the first edition of Saturday Morning Recommended Reading. Let me know, what are you reading, what are you loving, recommend something, article, book, podcast, whatever. Have a great day, have a great weekend.